Welcome everyone to today's webinar. It's the next in our Watermark Masterclass series, and today's topic on mastering leadership presence and how to navigate through uncertainty with agility and confidence. I'm Caroline McAuliffe and I'm a senior partner at Watermark Search. We're thrilled to have you all here, and before we dive into our discussion, I want to encourage active participation for the next hour. Please feel free to ask questions throughout via the chat or the Q&A box. We welcome as many questions as possible and we'll aim to address them either during the session or in a dedicated Q&A segment towards the end. Remember, this session is being recorded and will be available on our website for future viewing. Now, let's set the stage with some fascinating insights. In Watermark's 2024 Annual Interim Executive Survey report, 54% of respondents identified executive management and leadership as one of the top 3 business areas requiring urgent attention to address skills gaps, and 34% believe agility and adaptability are the most valued human skills an interim executive can bring to an organisation. Other recent research reinforces our findings of the critical importance of leadership presence, adaptability and agility in today's uncertain world. Leadership presence goes beyond just holding a title. It's about inspiring confidence and trust. Leaders with strong presence are seen as more credible and can be better engage and motivate their teams. So providing stability and direction in uncertain times. High emotional intelligence is also a key component of this presence, enabling leaders to manage stress and make empathetic decisions. Adaptability and agility are essential traits for leaders navigating this rapidly changing business landscape. Agile leaders can quickly pivot strategies in response to new challenges and opportunities, ensuring their organizations remain resilient and competitive. Embracing a learn-it-all mindset helps leaders stay open to new information and perspectives. So in a world of ever-increasing uncertainty, how can we ensure that we show up with the leadership skills that we require in order to engage stakeholders with effective change? How can we offer certainty and confidence in a sea of ambiguity? So today we're delighted to welcome our esteemed guest speaker, Sue Rosen. Sue is going to talk to us today about her view on leadership, that it's not a title, it's a mindset, an approach and a choice, and at its centre is your leadership presence. Following this session, our objective is each of you will understand what leadership presence truly is and why it's critical for your success, recognise the keys to the heart of leadership presence, and have 3 or 4 actionable strategies for cultivating your leadership presence. And without further ado, let me introduce you to our esteemed guest, Sue Rosen. Sue's not just a leadership expert, she's a leader with over 25 years in senior finance roles. Sue has real-world experience that counts. From her roles as CFO to sitting on boards, Sue knows firsthand why empowering professionals to become courageous and compassionate leaders with presence matters. Sue is experienced at working with professionals seeking to develop their capacity for authentic leadership and has a passion for working with people who want to elevate their executive presence so they can increase their leadership impact. Sue challenges clients to explore the narratives underlying their beliefs and assumptions so that they can achieve both personal and professional growth. Sue is an experienced, highly credentialed executive coach, accredited with the ICF and the IECL, and has run her own boutique executive coaching practice for 9 years, providing services in the areas of leadership development, coaching, facilitation, and public speaking. And Sue and I would like to kick things off by asking your opinion as to why you believe there is a skills gap in executive leadership in Australia, and what are the factors that have contributed to this? So we've already spoken together about, the COVID factor. A high number of seasoned execs left organisations during or post-COVID to transition to an interim or portfolio career path, thus leaving a wisdom and mentoring gap behind, and potentially less experienced leaders promoted beyond their capabilities. Yes, they're very keen and technically strong, but potentially not enough leadership experience or access to mentors or skills development being offered. Another factor could be the concept of what got you here won't get you there, proposed by author and exec coach Marshall Goldsmith. Embracing and developing more interpersonal human behaviors and questioning the belief that one's own success justifies doing the same things we've always done. So we'd invite you to add some commentary into the chat box to start things off. And let's have a look and see what you all think about that.
Thank you, Caroline. We're getting some interesting comments in there already. So some leaders being too scared to make decisions in case they get the wrong decisions. Promotion of technical experts with a lack of leadership development investment. That's certainly something I see in my work. Yeah, and then there's been a focus perhaps on transactional leadership rather than transformational leadership. And yeah, Kylie, reduced budgets. So I hear that, that you get a lot of pushback on spending the money on developing our leaders. And it's, of course, I think you and I certainly would agree, Caroline, that it's a false economy.
Yeah. So very interesting. Working from home, that's an interesting, gap. We've talked about that a bit in our company, about the fact that a career is not made working from home for our more younger executives, and being visible and learning from one another. That's possibly a missing factor, isn't it?
Yeah, I would agree. I think that's certainly true at the younger end. And I think even as you become more mature in your career, in fact, I'm finding that a lot of the more mature people that I talk to, they're the ones keenest to be back in the, office. Although many of them are still also embracing the idea of flexibility and actually what is possible with new ways of working, rather than going back to how we all started our careers, which was, 9 till 6, Monday to Friday in the one space.
That was an interesting comment there, Sue, about how some people just don't want to be leaders.
No.
They want to remain where they are. But in terms of the traditional trajectory of a career pathway, it's almost seen that you need to move into a leadership position to progress.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, isn't it? And perhaps we need more to think in our organizations, think more broadly about how can we leverage the skills and the strengths of individuals who don't want to lead teams of people, that actually have lots of technical capabilities. And, we often, and a couple of people have referred to it, the piece about getting elevated beyond your capability because you are great in whatever your technical capacity is, and then being elevated to being the leader of people in that function. And actually, how can we accommodate the people who want to keep growing and learning and developing, but purely in the sense of their technical skills, and they don't want to step into that leadership piece? And I think we have to look as organizations around our structures. How can we really tap into that expertise that is out there, even when people don't want to step into those leadership roles?
That's an interesting one I hadn't really thought about. Sue, would you like to commence, the model that you have come up with in terms of leadership presence, what that is and why it's so important?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And thank you for inviting me to join you today, Caroline. It is great to be here with so many people interested in this topic. So just touching on, the Watermark statistics that you mentioned before, Caroline, 34% of the respondents said that agility and adaptability are critical. And so how do we develop those as professionals? And I believe that all of our leadership skills begin with us looking inward. It's doing the work as individuals and not just expecting this to be something that happens to us out in the world. And the reason we have to start from within is because we need a really strong, stable base from which to launch ourselves. I like to use, the diving analogy. You need a strong and stable base. Even if it's a springboard, there's only a limited degree of flex in that, because we don't want to be simply floating around with no grounded core. Now, this guy in the photograph, he may not be elegant in his style, but he's certainly agile, and that's the ability to, and we also hear it in parenting, that kids need a strong, secure base from which to launch themselves. And I think this is really true as leaders. So I'm going to start by asking a question, because I really believe that our strong leadership core starts with looking within. And my first question, and actually if I can ask Ali to bring our poll up, who has been told at some point in their career that you need to develop more executive presence? I'm going to give you all a moment to just, it's a simple yes or no. Have you heard that? Have you had that feedback at some point in your career? And then we'll give you 30 or 45 seconds to answer that, and then I'll ask Ali to share the results.
Yes, self-discovery. Great comment here by Caroline on the chat. It's essential that self-discovery is key. I mean, it's almost that idea of putting on your own oxygen mask first, understanding yourself before, that understanding your values, your skills, your strengths, your personality traits, and then being able to apply that in a mentoring situation with others.
Yeah, I think it really is true that you can't lead others until you learn to lead yourself. And that includes knowing yourself. And I'll talk to some of that, but includes knowing yourself and your emotional regulation and all of those things. So it's actually split relatively evenly, but 57%. So still a majority have been at some point given this feedback about needing more executive presence. And I think what's really challenging sometimes with being given that feedback is that we've heard it and we've all heard the term, but it can be harder to actually define it. And it can be harder to define what it is and what that means for how I actually show up. Because, I always think there's the piece about who thinks it's looking sharp and buying the Armani suit or being the loudest voice in the room. And there would certainly be some others, not just me and Caroline, on the call who would recognize that the term can make some of us feel a little bit uncomfortable because it conjures up images of Gordon Gekko. The real kind of 1980s vision of executive presence. Male, grey-haired, formal suiting, a booming voice, the corner office, an ability to command, and really overwhelming hubris. Yet here we are in 2024, and the term is back in the leadership lexicon. And today I want to challenge how we think about it. And I'm shifting, and actually some of you will know that I wrote a white paper a couple of years ago on executive presence, and I'm preferring now to refer to it as leadership presence, partly in order to separate from some of that association from the 80s and 90s and what it looked like. So I am going to start with a couple of definitions that I like. One is an ability to inspire the confidence of others in your capabilities and your potential, even under pressure. And the second is an ability to articulate and express your expertise in order to influence others. So, this gives us a sense of what it is. And let's now explore, why does it matter so much? And Caroline, you actually identified these beautifully, and I'm just going to reiterate those. It matters because I believe leadership presence or executive presence is critical to our success. And in fact, Forbes magazine shared a survey last year or the year before that a lack of executive presence will hold you back in your career. And so many of us want to believe it is other things around, our ability to work hard, our willingness to be enthusiastic, all of those things, the competence and the technical expertise that'll bring us success. Because leadership presence or executive presence feels nebulous and kind of tricky to get a hold on. So I coach leaders all the time to help them increase their leadership capacity and their presence. And in doing that work, I've really narrowed this down to what I believe are 3 critical capabilities that leadership presence helps us deliver on. It improves our ability to influence, it gives us greater credibility, and it generates trust. So just to unpack those a little, is you need to be able to influence your peers in order to achieve outcomes. Leaders are change agents in organizations, and it's essential to acknowledge that driving change is not about technology and systems. They are fabulous. There are millions of fabulous tech systems that can help us become more efficient and effective at work. But driving change is all about the people. We have all seen instances of new systems being brought in which have not been successfully implemented because the people have not embraced the change. And I know amongst those out there who are working as interims, you know, this is often the stuff you're brought in to lead and or fix up the mess, because this is hard.
That's absolutely
It's not
right
just about, it's just not about knowing the system. It is actually, how am I going to come in and implement that in this environment with these people?
Yeah, and it's bespoke, and it's it's cultural, it's people change, it's influence, and interim executives, interesting, you have to use all of their influencing skills from day one, because they don't have title or tenure, you know, with this organization. So it's even a keener trait that needs to be honed, you know, by an interim exec as opposed to an executive.
Yeah, you're not given the same length of time in order which to develop that and demonstrate that. You really have to come in and be able to, you know, build those relationships and spark those conversations so quickly. And the second critical factor, I think, that leadership presence can help us with is our credibility, because credibility is based not only on your ability to do the job, but on your ability to make others believe you can do it. It's this perception piece. Your team members need to believe that you have the capability to get the job done. Your board members need to believe that their organization is in safe hands. And your investors need to believe in your story. So it's all about inspiring the confidence of others that you'll be able to deliver no matter what, that you can get the job done when there's chaos all around. And this is what talks to that piece about complexity and uncertainty. And you might recall it was a key part of those two definitions as well. So this is about maintaining the calm and the composure when it's all turning to the proverbial out in the world. And then the third element here is leadership presence gives you the ability to build trust. And this is absolutely critical, because no one wants to work with someone they don't trust. In a world of uncertainty and ambiguity, people need to be able to trust in you and your composure. They need to be able to trust that you will provide that stable base based on a clear sense of purpose and alignment with well-articulated values. Now, years ago, in my own experience, I was working as a financial controller for a company where I used to say that I trusted the CEO about as far as I could throw her. And that probably wasn't a great sign. And it certainly didn't impact my work well. You know, that certainly adversely impacted my motivation and my performance. It really is hard to do your best work when you're in that scenario. And I thought we might throw a poll out there as well, because I find it really an interesting piece about how many of you have worked for someone you didn't trust, who wasn't walking their talk. And then actually, to add to that, if you can answer the poll, but also perhaps drop in the chat how that made you feel. You know, what was the result of that? Certainly, I know I did not deliver my best work. I was not performing at my best once that trust had been broken. And
the worst of that, in my experience, when you lose trust, you start, and you've got a misalignment of values. I actually got physically ill from that, because values alignment and trust it's so important for me personally.
And that resonates with me as well.
In that way, you know, that's how that kind of manifested itself.
Yeah, and I also at that time as well, and I think it's quite common that people get sick.
Yeah,
it's the burnout, the energy that is required becomes so much greater in order to try and get anything done. And you're struggling to get into a sense of flow. Now, I'm looking at that result and it's quite horrifying.
That is horrifying.
95%
and worrying. Yeah.
135 people have answered that poll and 95% have said they've worked for someone they didn't trust. So the 7 of you who have not, that is fabulous.
Yeah.
I hope actually that helps you really appreciate your experiences, because that is horrifying. And I think it just talks to what we're saying, Caroline, about how important it is. Trust in relationships at work is just critical. And leadership presence and authenticity are really tightly linked. And authenticity is fundamental to this ability to build trust. People have to believe in what we're saying, and they have to see that our actions are aligned with our words. And I think for me, that was what was lacking. The CEO was saying the public statements were all about this, and the behaviors that were carrying on in the organization were way over here. And that's when people lose trust. There has to be, as you said, an alignment to values, and then an alignment every day between the behaviors in the organization and what we tolerate in the organization, sometimes the bad behaviors that get overlooked or forgiven because somebody is a strong revenue raiser. Those kind of things really affect everybody around who is watching and observing and experiencing. So that experience has been part of my driving motivation, actually, with this whole shift from running finance teams myself to being passionate about empowering people to become more authentic leaders. So we've identified the 3 critical reasons why we need leadership presence. So how do we develop it? And again, so I've developed this model based on the work I've done with many, many leaders. And I propose that we think about it as me and you and us. So these 3 intersecting circles around the traits of confidence, humility, and connection. And I'm going to run through each of them with a strategy related to each as well. So I'm going to start with saying, let's think about me, or this is the real looking inward. Who am I? So who feels confident every time they walk into a room in their leadership role? My guess, in my experience of working with leaders, is it's not always the case. If it is you and you always feel super confident in your leadership role, well, hold that thought, because I'm going to come to you on the next trait. But for the rest of us, we're going to focus first on the very first step in cultivating your leadership presence, because I want you to take one thing home today, which will make a huge difference to your leadership presence and something you can work with right away. Because I know what your day is potentially going to be like this afternoon. You've blocked out this hour to be here, which is fantastic. And then you get back to your work and there'll be a million things going through your head. Your CEO will be saying they need a report and they need it now. And the sales manager is shouting because the numbers you released don't agree with the spreadsheet that their people maintain. You've got an investor calling you saying they can't log into the portal. Your financial controller wants help because they can't get the budget model right. The payroll manager has accidentally entered the wrong enterprise agreement. Someone forgot to authorize payments. No one's been paid. And the EA is asking you what restaurant you want to take your bankers to. And then your teenagers are texting to ask, what's for dinner? #hungry. And then is going on. So the most important thing you can do at that point is stop. Simply stop what you're doing. So this is an S for stop what you're doing right now. A T for take a breath. O, observe what's happening inside of you. And P, proceed with awareness. This is John Kabat-Zinn's stop technique for regulating ourselves and our emotional reactions. And this is really, I think, at the key to what we mentioned before about self-leadership and self-regulation. It's one of my favorites to use to get us to slow down, to go faster, so that we can see the big picture and reconnect to what is most important. As I've said, and I say it a lot, leadership presence starts with going inwards, not outwards. It's not about the suit that you put on. That might help, but it is about looking inwards. And to do that, we need to step off the hamster wheel that we all get caught on, and we need to take a strategic pause. We take this strategic pause to understand ourselves more deeply, to identify our values, to identify the triggers which send us into reactivity and which often result in us either snapping back at somebody or withdrawing and, moving away from the situation. It helps us gain clarity on what we want to achieve and how we want to show up. Yeah. And a key element of this strategic pause is reconnecting with your breath.
Yeah.
So let's just check. Is everybody out there still breathing? Has anyone collapsed to the floor? I certainly hope not. We all breathe every day. But when did you last focus on your breath? So bringing our focus to our breath ensures that we're truly present right here, right now. And that changes both how we show up and how we're perceived. So I'm going to invite everybody to try a small exercise with me, as long as you're not driving. So for any of those of you who are driving around between clients or driving out for lunch or whatever it is, the rest of you, if you're sat somewhere safely, I'm going to ask you to either shut your eyes or lower your gaze and just take a deep inhale and exhale. So breathing in and breathing out. And now this time, as you inhale, I want you to focus on a time when you were at your best, when work was going well and you were feeling strong and confident. And now as you exhale, allow yourself to sense what that feels like in your body. What do you notice? We'll try another one like that. So inhaling, focusing on that time you felt at your best and then feeling confident and strong. And as you exhale, notice what's happening to your breath, your posture, and any sensations in your body.
Well, I started smiling, Sue.
You started smiling. Oh, lovely, Caroline. Yeah. Yeah. I'm interested, maybe drop it in the chat for anybody else, what you noticed around your posture, your breath, because changing our physiology like this can make a huge difference. Maybe I'm going to have a quick look in the chat to see if feeling taller and a sense of clarity, more relaxed, stable. Yeah, beautiful. So I know that sometimes this sounds a bit woo-woo in a leadership presentation. But our bodies and our minds create a feedback loop. And many of you on here, I know, are finance people and those from other functions as well. Also, many of you love data. And this is additional data. This is a simple act of taking a conscious breath, which can create confidence because it gives your body a chance to tap into what that feels like. This is about reminding your physical self, getting into the physiology, reminding yourself of how it feels to feel taller, stronger, opening up your chest, being able to breathe into your diaphragm. All of these things help you. And I recommend this technique before you walk into any potentially stressful meeting. And I teach it all the time. And I encourage people to do it several times a day, even when they're not going into something stressful, so that when you are going into something stressful, you have it easily accessible as a tool to tap into.
You can also engage it to stop rumination post event or difficult conversation, or because the self-talk starts to kick in, doesn't it?
Oh,
and
yeah.
You can put yourself through hell around what happened there and what I could have done better. and so that stop tool,
Yeah.
I think, is another great way to just circumvent that self-talk and rumination that we sometimes go through.
Yeah. And, Caroline, there's so much benefit to be gained from reflecting on what happened and learning from it.
Yeah.
But it's very easy to get stuck in the loop of rumination, as you say. So actually, I think this technique, especially given, everybody I speak to is scheduled so heavily straight from this meeting to the next meeting to the next meeting, whether they're in person or on Zoom, and actually it can be, about how long did that take us then? About a minute. It can be very short, but getting yourself back in your body gets you back in the present, because your body is only ever in the present moment. It can't be worrying about the future, and it can't be ruminating on the past. Your body is right here, your breath and your body. So this is, anything that brings you back into that, I think, between meetings allows you to put aside. Otherwise, we know how that feels. We're still pondering what went wrong in that meeting as we've walked into the next one. So how can we be fully present to listening to the next meeting, or, the new people we're sitting with now? Mm-hmm. So, I just think this is enormously important and so overlooked. And this helps us build this grounded inner confidence. This isn't about confidence in a sense of bravado. It's about connecting back in to what's important to us and who we are, and being present with that. And that's what cultivates our leadership presence, so that other people start to see us in a new light.
Yeah.
It also, of course, helps enormously with this piece about staying calm and composed when there's chaos and uncertainty. How do we think about what's important right now? What's the next step? Rather than being, a headless chicken.
Excellent tool.
So our next element, the next key around our leadership presence, now that we're all breathing deeper and sitting up straighter, is focused on you, which means the other person, the person we're interacting with. And this is all about humility. So this is especially for those of you who said you always feel confident, because a surplus of confidence can topple over into arrogance, which can be just as damaging to your leadership presence as a lack of confidence. Because alongside valuing what we bring to the table, it's also critical that we practice humility and we see the value in what others bring, and we learn from their perspectives. So as author Rick Warren wrote, humility is not thinking less of yourself. So this is not about false modesty. This goes absolutely hand in hand with that inner confidence that we're building. It's about thinking of yourself less. How are you serving other people is the focus. And in this domain, my top tip is to challenge ourselves to see multiple perspectives and be able to learn to hold multiple perspectives simultaneously, even when they are apparently paradoxical, which, of course, is happening at work all of the time. So I want to share with you a short video that was run by The Guardian back in the 1980s, but I do love the message. So I'll just write, it takes about a minute or less, even 30 seconds.
An event seen from one point of view gives one impression. Seen from another point of view, it gives quite a different impression. But it's only when you get the whole picture you can fully understand what's going on.
So when we're faced with a situation, no matter how it presents itself initially, the trick here is to ask ourselves, what else might be true? Or how might I be wrong? And this really cuts to, our ability to listen, to be able to engage the contributions of others. And I think when we let go of our assumption that many of us were brought up with, that as the boss, we have to have all the answers. When we can let that go and allow ourselves to be more vulnerable, we start listening more and we start asking more questions. And that results in more meaningful conversations, and more productive decision making. And then the third key to cultivating your leadership presence is connection. This is all about us as a collective. So our leadership presence exists, it comes from within, but it also exists in the space between us. And this is why connection is so important. As human beings, we're social animals, we need connection. And our presence is built in our moments of interaction with others. It's about your reputation. It's about how others experience you, what they buy from you in terms of your ideas, and what people say about you when you're not in the room. So my tip in this domain is to get out from behind your desks and in front of people from across the business. I've been that person who felt, blindsided by an announcement of a project that I felt I should have been involved in. And I've heard this from clients as well, is, they're not involving me early enough on the project to bring my expertise in. And then we end up in a, running to catch up state of, well, we should have thought about this at the beginning, but we didn't. And I look back now, and with hindsight, I can say that, not knowing about that project was partly my own fault. I was neglecting the relationships that I should have been fostering because I was so head down, bum up in terms of sitting and doing the work and being too much in the doing and not enough elevating myself to see that bigger picture, be able to build relationships across different functions, across different divisions, across different areas of the business. And I would expand that even further to say, this also talks to how are you building your reputation and your profile outside of your own business. I mean, this is even more important. This is even more important when you're working in that interim space. I'm sure, Caroline, you would absolutely be hammering that one home all the time.
Yeah, it's key. Number one key is networking. When you transition to an interim career, that's what you need to be doing, and that's where most of your opportunities will be coming from, your own personal professional network. And it is quite often when we speak with executives who've been in a permanent career for a while, they've let those networks lull and they have to restart the reconnection process again. Those that are most successful have kept those networks alive and well, that's key.
And it is, I completely acknowledge it's so easy to do. I have so many people say to me, it's, I just can't find the time to, especially, if you've got family and you're trying to be present for your family and present at your work, I can't find the time. And I think this becomes, to as many things do, it comes to a question of prioritizing, because otherwise what happens, and what I see frequently, is that people get to the point, which is often the point when they're talking to you, Caroline, saying, I've just come out of a role for whatever reason, and now I'm looking for my next role, and everybody's saying I need to network. But I feel really bad reaching out to these people because it's the first time in 5 years that I've spoken to them, and I'm reaching out saying I'm looking for a job. So it's so critical that we maintain these relationships on the way through our career at all stages in our career. Yeah. So what I'm going to encourage you all to do, because I said I'm going to encourage you to do something on each of these elements, is right after today's webinar, I want you to make a list of the people with whom you need to be fostering stronger relationships. And actually schedule some meetings. This doesn't have to be all day, every day, but, if you can make a list of 6 people and you could schedule a coffee with one person each week for the next 6 weeks, that's a great starting place. And that might be, depending on where you are at in your career or what your situation is, this might be people within your current organization, so that you are really demonstrating that you want to get involved and understand and building the profile. Because as we said, then it's about how people talk about you when you're not in the room. So, or it can be outside. So that's the high level summary of the model I work with. Obviously, there are lots of elements you'll see on there. There's, each of the elements has is broken down into 3 segments. But I've given you today a tip on each one of these. You know, there's confidence is about me, humility is about you, and connection is about us collectively. And I go back to it. Leadership presence is critical to your success. And the good news is that it can be learned. It is not an innate trait that some people are born with and some people are not. Research from the US actually suggests that 98% of leaders have to develop it. They don't just magically have it. So it is something you can be really conscious and intentional about developing. And so, you know, this is the field I work in, really is coaching people around using these approaches and others, and how these 3 intersect and come together to help you build your executive presence. So just to sum up, it's the breath. How can you use your breath to help you tap into confidence and clarity and speak up more powerfully? How can you ask more questions so that you take new perspectives? And how can you connect more so that you build your understanding of where you can add value? Because when you present with this inner confidence and you have the humility to know that you can influence but not control outcomes, and you devote energy to building connections and working collaboratively, you develop this strong platform that we spoke about at the beginning, the strong platform from which to dive off and be agile and adaptable. Unfortunately, there is no silver bullet. It takes time. It's built over time, this degree of presence. But I really strongly believe that it can make a massive difference to your career. So I'm really happy to go to questions at this point, but also I want to give people the opportunity to, if they're interested in downloading my white paper, that QR code will take you there, because what you're doing as leaders really matters. And I think that's really brought home by that stat in particular about trust, about how many of you have worked for a boss that you didn't trust. And, you know, that you have to ask yourself, well, do I want to be that boss? Or do I want to lead with authenticity and bring leadership presence so that I can, you know, improve my ability to influence, inspire, empower people, and therefore increase the impact I have? You know, I believe. Sure. Yeah, absolutely, Caroline.
You touched on vulnerability, and I feel like this is an area that needs to be explored, because as a C-suite executive, it can be a very lonely place in terms of showing your vulnerability upwards and downwards, you know, with your team, with your board, or your executive CEO. So what's your thoughts on the difference between vulnerability perhaps and authenticity, and how do we manage that because I think it's almost, you have to be more courageous to actually be vulnerable.
I would absolutely agree. And if there's anyone on the call who has not seen or heard of any of Brené Brown's work, which is all about it takes courage to be vulnerable, I think it's absolutely key. I think you're not going to be fully authentic unless you allow yourself to be vulnerable. But I don't think vulnerability means I need to share everything. Because back to this point about you have to inspire the confidence of others. So, you know, to your team, you need to be able to present a degree of vulnerability in acknowledging that you don't have all the answers. You know, I think some of us were brought up with this assumption that the boss knows everything. And I think we want to move away from that. But there's a piece there about acknowledging to your team that you don't have all the answers, and presenting with confidence the fact that you believe we can work through whatever this challenge is by bringing in the contributions of everybody else. And that doesn't mean, you know, that you show up and you tell them, well, I don't know what the heck is going on, because that is not going to inspire the confidence in them. And you certainly, you know, can't pitch up on an investor roadshow and saying, you know, well, we haven't got a clue. You may privately sometimes think that, So there's definitely a constant balancing act between how much you show and how much you can openly say. And actually, I do believe that then talks to the importance as a senior leader of having your own support network, because you need to be able to have places where you can have those very open and transparent conversations where you admit to yourself or to a safe peer group that you don't know what's going on. So that's how I would answer that, Caroline, that I think it's a constant balance. You don't want to show up saying you know nothing, but you do want to be vulnerable enough to acknowledge you don't have all the answers.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Sue. Now, do we have any other questions in the chat? I'm just trying to get back to the chat here and see.
We've got a few comments on the authenticity and a balance, because people want the connection and and that's why I say this is this grounded confidence comes in your presence, because it's the ability to say, I don't have all the answers, but I know that together we can figure it out. And Paul says being vulnerable and authentic fosters trust. Yeah.
We also have hi everyone, sorry, I'm Ali, I'm the marketing executive at Watermark. We do have another question here. So when you were talking about, Sue, of looking within, Michael asked, is this self-awareness, self-discovery something that you can only gain with 20 plus years of career experience? Is it lack wisdom?
It's a great question, Michael. I actually believe that wisdom or self-discovery or, self-understanding doesn't necessarily just happen as you get older. I think we all know people who are older or more mature in years, but still don't seem to have developed very much of it, self-awareness. And so I think it still has to be a conscious piece. I think it is. I think certainly when you have 20 plus years of experience, you've got more to draw on. But I look back at my own career and I often think I wish I had started this self-reflective and self-discovery piece much earlier in my career. I think I would have been more effective as a young leader if I had been open to having some of these really open and vulnerable conversations, to being reflecting on what was and wasn't working for me, rather than really being driven by this belief that if I could just learn everything and work really hard and have all the answers, then I would be great. So, Michael, I think the 20 years experience certainly helps, but it's not a foregone conclusion that brings wisdom. And you can certainly, I encourage people to start this work earlier in their careers. I hope that helps.
Sue, on the question of emotional intelligence, how do we best develop strategies for people to develop emotional intelligence and empathy in leadership?
So it's a great question, because I think emotional intelligence, and actually I see somebody else's question there about what do I think. I think emotional intelligence absolutely plays a key role. I think that's now been shown for a long time in the research. It's no longer it's not just about technical skills and IQ. Emotional intelligence is definitely a key element. And one of the key elements of emotional intelligence is understanding yourself. So it's understanding who you are, what's important to you, what triggers you, what beliefs and assumptions you're operating under that are invisible to you. So, I think that is part of the unpacking that we need to do at an individual level, is actually what's my underlying assumption here and how might I challenge that? Which goes back to those questions, what else might be true, or how might I be wrong? Because we go about our lives assuming that certain things to be true. And I think the emotional intelligence comes with actually, how can I practice listening to other people? How can I think a lot of it comes down to how prepared am I to sit and listen to the perspectives of other people rather than engage, we use the term as a conversation. I'm going into conversation with this person, but it's actually not always a real dialogue. It ends up being, I have my perspective, they have their perspective, and I'm just going to sit here until I get my chance to speak. And, if we want to cultivate more empathy and a more emotional intelligence, we need to genuinely listen and try and imagine, well, not even imagine, put ourselves in their shoes and understand. And another question I love always is when somebody has a really radically different view to ours, is to ask ourselves, well, how did they come to that view? What is it that is in their background culturally or educationally or socially that brought them to that? Because their life experience might be so different to ours that we cannot possibly conceive of, how they've arrived at that answer. So I absolutely, I think somebody's question about can you teach? Yes, emotional intelligence is critical. I see it as being part of this leadership presence piece, and you can learn, but you have to be really intentional and be prepared to do the work and get uncomfortable.
We've got a note here, Sue, that what if you come across a leader who's not prepared to change their leadership style in service of others, lacking growth mindset?
Yeah, I'm just like, So I think if someone is not prepared to change anything about them, I don't think they're going to be an effective leader. I think really without being prepared, I think leadership is a practice that requires continual learning and growth and development. It's not like you nail it and then it's all done. The best leaders keep challenging themselves. They keep learning on all kinds of topics, maybe completely diverse topics outside of their general work. They keep learning about themselves. They keep learning about how they interact with other people. So I think a growth mindset, goes a long way to building great leadership and really bringing curiosity to how you operate. And if someone's not prepared to do that, then I would question what they're doing in that leadership role.
I mean, there's that when they are a leader of the company and it's very difficult and they're not going to change, it can be quite so how do you, as a person, you have to become a leader yourself, I suppose. That's the answer, isn't it? You kind of apply it in your sphere of influence and leadership.
And, Caroline, I think at the end of the day, that's all you can do. I mean, I remember being in something I guess it was, a company, a small business I was with many years ago in a strategy session or whatever. And a number of us had some challenges or issues with the CEO. And the facilitator ended up saying, at the end of the day, and this goes back to what I was saying, you can't control what the other person does, especially when they were the owner and CEO of the business.
Yeah.
All you can change is how you respond to them. And of course, and that's what I will always say to clients is, if you change how you respond, it will have a ripple effect or an echo effect. Something will come back differently, either from that person or from others. You can choose how you show up with your team and your peers. And then ultimately, if there is no values alignment and you don't trust them, or all those other things are missing, for me, that's when you look elsewhere as well. Because at the end of the day, we have to acknowledge that as leaders, we like to think we have control, but actually there are so many things we don't have control over. And that's why influence is so important. We can, we have control over how we respond,
yes,
not how others react.
Any observations, Sue, on the emerging next generation leaders and whether they are more or less likely to develop and uphold leadership traits?
Oh, it's a great question, Phil. I'm going to be really honest and say I'm not sure. So, I say that partly because I would say I am working more with more mature leaders on the whole. I do think, though, And sometimes I wonder, though, if it's the people who are in my sphere. There are emerging leaders in my sphere of people that I talk to, and they are the people who are interested in growth and development. And I do believe, so actually I'm now going to shift to, even as I speak, I'm going to shift to a more positive outlook to say that there is a much greater, more mainstream understanding that leadership is not just being about, doing well at your job and being promoted up and up and up and then sitting in a top role with a title. I think there is a much broader understanding now that what we want to bring to leadership, we've moved away from, kind of military style command and control. And the younger generations now are simply not going to tolerate. I look back at the early parts of my career, and I look back at what my daughters in their early 20s would tolerate. I would be like, no, get out of there. Do not put up with that. So, I do think there has been a shift. And I think that, of course, is also challenging some organizations. The whole, 5 generations in a workforce is challenging for lots of reasons, but there definitely are. There's a different approach from the much younger people coming into the workforce now.
What about, would you have a tip on how to chip away at execs that like to work in silos or protective mode to enable better conversation?
Oh, great. Yes, great question. I think we all see silos and we go, yeah, we know that's not a good thing, but it can absolutely be challenging to chip away at them, as this participant said. I think the key there really is, how can I get these people in a room having a conversation? How can we start to open up a conversation which invites and welcomes the input from each of those individual silos, and look then at how we can be so much more creative and innovative and effective if we bring inputs from everybody together, and get alignment. So I think the first step is to try and get the people in the room. I think the second step is really having clarity around the purpose behind which you're aligned. So what are we here to do as an organization? What are we here to do as a leadership team? And how can we all contribute to that and move us all forward, rather than everybody going off on their own tangent?
So I've got an interesting question from my colleague Donna. How important do you think personal styling, grooming, clothing impacts leadership presence in the context of your me, you, us paradigm? For confidence to be approachable or relatable, build trust. Do you think there's still a perception out there about how we show up physically in our styling and grooming and clothing, and how that impacts all of those things?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I have left that out of my model because I really believe that this is actually about how we turn up from the inside out. This is an inside out job, not an outside in job. However, there is absolutely a role still for turning up with a level of personal grooming, which is, and I think the rules have relaxed around that. I mean, I'm looking at both you and me today. Look, we've both put on a blazer and a collared shirt and the red lipstick. So, but we are both women of a similar age. So there's that perception. And if I was, and if I'm working in one of the big tech businesses, my jeans and T-shirts are going to be the go. So I think there is definitely a role, and there's always this balance about being seen to fit in, but also not being you don't necessarily want to fit in to the degree when you become, so that you become invisible.
Yeah.
So I do think there's a role of turning up, being well groomed and well presented, but that might mean, a T-shirt and jeans and sneakers, or it might mean a suit. So I think we are way more relaxed on that nowadays. I don't think that in itself is enough, but I do think it still plays a role. And I would always say, start from the inside out, but then also think about some of those tactical pieces about when, especially, you know, you would know with interviews, especially when I'm going in somewhere for the first time or I'm interviewing, how do I look like, you know, the person they might want to slot into that role? I think that's when there's a really big case for it.
Great. Top of the hour. Sue, we could talk for hours, but we need to. Thank you so much for coming along, sharing your wisdom. It's been an amazing webinar. We're getting lots of thanks for the session. Wonderful insights. And key is those practical takeaways. I will never forget stop again. So thank you so much for your time. Everyone on the webinar, thanks for attending. Please do connect with Sue and myself if you would like to have further discussions. We'll be sharing the link and look forward to seeing you on the next webinar in the next few weeks, so in our series. So have a wonderful afternoon, everyone. All the best.
Thanks, Caroline. Thank you, everybody.